Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to Beyond the Darkness on a True Crime Tuesday Revisited episode, our final episode for this special October run. That's right, we've picked some of our absolute favorite true crime shows from the past 12 years, and we've displayed them for you over the last 4 weeks here on the show, hoping that you'll enjoy them. And if you like what you've heard, you'll try out our new true crime podcast, True Crime Tuesday. Sit back and enjoy. Tonight's episode is our final one for this run, and it's got everything you could possibly want for a Halloween True Crime Tuesday. That's right, the devil, the werewolf, and a killer love story. It is our special Halloween edition of Beyond the Darkness True Crime Tuesday Revisited.
A place that is spoken about only in whispers. A dark area that spawns the beginnings of urban legends. A place where anything can happen and usually does. During the light of day, it hides just outside of view. But when the sun goes down, spirits, creatures of the night, roam free. And things do go bump in the night. It is in every state and every country, and there is no escaping it, no matter how safe you feel behind your locked doors and latched windows. So we invite you to turn down the lights and turn up your radio while we join Dave Schrader and Tim Dennis, your hosts, on a journey into the darkness on the edge of town.
Good evening and welcome to the show. This is the best in paranormal talk radio. Darkness Radio is on the air. I'm your host, Dave Schrader, along with me, Tim Dennis. For those of you just joining us and not familiar with the format of the show, Monday through Friday, we talk about all aspects of the strange, the unusual, the paranormal. And on Tuesday nights, we dedicate to True Crime Tuesdays. Tonight, Tim, we have got a case that is so bizarre, so strange, and fits in perfectly with our true crime and has some of the weird supernatural angles on it. When you hear this story, it is going to blow your mind. Tonight, killer kids. We're going to talk about kids that take lives, but we've got a special guest that's going to join us for the first 2 hours of the show this evening. A very strange story that came to my attention through a couple of our listeners. We've got some great listeners out there always pointing us in the direction of some intriguing material. The book, Runaway Devil, was written by Calgary Herald journalists Robert Remington and Sherri Zickefoose. It tells the true story of JR, a 12-year-old Canadian girl who was convicted of participating in the murders of her mother, father, and 8-year-old brother in the spring of 2006. Her accomplice, Tim?
Yeah.
Was her boyfriend. Now, let me repeat this. JR was 12. Her boyfriend, 23.
Very bizarre in itself.
Jeremy Allen Steinke professed to be a 300-year-old werewolf with a taste for blood. Together, the pair concocted a plot to murder JR's family so they could pursue an illicit relationship forbidden by her parents. The book contains previously unpublished details of this notorious crime that shocked the nation, and the authors secured exclusive interviews, jailhouse love letters, and a court exhibit, the notorious stick drawing found in JR's school locker that turned her into a murder suspect in an instant. That's what's in the book. That's the case we're going to cover tonight. And Sherri is here with us. She is a staff writer for the Calgary Herald and the co-author of the national best-selling true crime book, Runaway Devil, How Forbidden Love Drove a 12-year-old Girl to Murder Her Family. Sherri, welcome to the show, and thank you for joining us this evening.
Hi, guys. Thanks for having me.
Now, how long have you been a journalist?
Oh, that would be telling, but I will say that I've been a daily news reporter for 11 years.
When this case broke, when this story started, had you ever heard of any kind of scenario like this before in your career of, covering these kind of crime stories and things? Had this even been a blip on your radar?
Well, I'm glad you asked that because I had been a real crime bug. Even when I was in journalism school, I was hanging out at the courthouse practicing my shorthand and really was very interested. These are sort of pre-CSI television show days, so right. I was a very keen student, but never, ever would I have imagined that something like this could have actually happened.
All right, let's get in this. And unfortunately, your co-author, who is from Duluth, Minnesota, could not join us this evening. He is off, but he has promised that he would come onto the show in the future and talk to us about some of the other crimes. Robert Remington, your co-author on this book. Let's meet some of the people involved in this case. And first off, we refer to the young lady as JR, and this is kind of an intriguing thing. And Tim, you might find this interesting. You know, having been involved in journalism now for, 20, 25 years, mm-hmm. There's some rules that we follow here in the United States, but that they can be easily bent and manipulated.
Yeah.
Canada, not so easy to bend and manipulate.
Right.
Why don't you explain to us a little bit about why we will only be referring to her as JR?
Well, basically, here in Canada, young offenders have their identities protected by law. So they're basically anonymous. And, of course, the reasoning behind that is to help them rehabilitate. The youth justice system exists to help these children find their way and not really to punish them like we would adults who really know right from wrong. What's tricky about the case of JR, of course she's 12, well under 18, when the police were looking for her in the earliest hours after the crime, they actually thought she was a missing person, that she'd been abducted. And so they published her photograph and her name in the hopes of getting the word out to make sure she was safe. Unfortunately, when they found that stick drawing in her locker that we'll talk about later on in our conversation, you can't really unring the bell. The photo was out. The name was out. You cannot erase that from the Internet. So although by law I am bound to identify her only by her initials as she was referred to in court, the Internet doesn't really have to obey those laws.
Well, and that was 12, so she's over 18 at this point, correct?
She's 20, just turned 20.
So, and you still are not allowed to make that acknowledgement, even though she's now crested the adult age.
Well, hang on to your hat. Her sentence will be over in about 2.5 years. Mm-hmm. If she keeps her nose clean for 5 years after that, her record is erased.
Wow.
She will never be identified, ever. And that's just the Canadian system. It's very different from our friends in the States.
Right. I believe, and maybe you know more about this than I do, Sherri, that if in the United States, they're not supposed to break the names of the children involved in these kind of things unless it seems to have already gotten out there. Then they can kind of address because it's already in the public eye. Is that the correct understanding, or have I got that wrong too?
Well, I mean, that's my understanding of the United States. In Canada, of course, right. The law is the law, and it's very stiff. I mean, Bob and I were actually hauled up in front of the judge during the preliminary hearing. Unfortunately, we made a technical breach. It wasn't on purpose. It was kind of more of an oopsie. And they took it very seriously, and we responded, and we knew we'd done the wrong thing. They take it very seriously, and they use this as an example. So we'll be referring to her as JR forever.
JR, it is. Okay. Well, let's talk about this now. JR, how old was she when she met her suitor, her boyfriend?
JR was 12 years old, and she was really, I think, just 6 months, had 6 months under her belt of being 12. If this crime had been committed 6 months earlier, she wouldn't have even been charged.
Wait a minute. Well, I guess we got to get into the crime, and then I'll come back to that statement because I'm boggled by it. And we're going to actually, in hour 3 tonight, folks, we're going to talk about a couple other cases, but I'm going to also open up phone lines on what your thoughts are, how children that kill should be handled by the law. Should they be treated like adults, especially when it's a premeditated crime? We'll open up in the third hour for phone calls. Sherri's here with us for the first 2 hours. Okay, so she's about 12 and a half at the time, and how long had she been seeing this guy?
Well, really, it had only been going on for a few months, but it wasn't much. They didn't really need much time. They were at such a fever pitch. They had met at the mall in Medicine Hat, which is a small Canadian city, a very Midwestern-like, and really hadn't known each other very long.
So this guy's 23. I mean, where did they meet? Just hanging out at the local video store? Where do these two come into each other's world?
Well, the mall was really right in the middle of the city, and JR grew up a suburban kid from a very typical family. And, of course, young kids like to hang out at the mall. Jeremy Steinke, on the other hand, is a 23-year-old man. He was a high school dropout, didn't really have a job, had nothing better to do than hang out at the mall. So it's not that surprising that would be their mutual ground on where they would hang out. And JR had, as a 12-year-old, did not look 12. She had very grown-up features and was hell-bent on portraying herself as being older. And on a bunch of her online profiles we found, she was saying that she was 15 or 16 years old. And she would easily pass for that. No one would question it. But I think what we found is a little girl trying to grow up very, very quickly.
All right, but even if you're pushing the limit and saying, okay, she could pass for 15, maybe 16, this guy's 23 years old. I mean, I used to cruise the malls and hang out when I was a teenager. I mean, I understand that whole deal. But I wasn't cruising for the 23-year-old girls. You know, I was cruising for the 15, 16-year-old girls that were my age. I mean, I know it's a sick world and people do bad things, but it just seems like, you know, for somebody so, and this guy has a very dramatic look about him from the photographs I've seen. And, you know, he's not like your everyday boy next door look. Was that something you think that appealed to her? She seemed to have this kind of gothic feel or vibe around it. Do you think that was part of the allure?
I think you're absolutely right. I think his look was very exciting for her because she, of course, is, as I've said, a little kid trying to grow up too quickly. And I think it appealed to her. I think she liked the drama. She was an artistic kid. And she liked the makeup that the goth kids were applying because it was artistic. And she just liked it. And frankly, you know, they're a bunch of sensitive kids. You know, they're certainly not condemning goth culture in any way, shape, or form.
Right.
But they were different, and it was a statement for her. It was a way to separate herself from her family with rules that were so middle class, and she wanted to be different. And here was a theatrical group of kids that she desperately wanted to be a part of. So when she saw Jeremy Steinke, you know, with his eye makeup and, you know, acting out, frankly, she was very, very attracted to that.
When Children Kill, that's our topic tonight on True Crime Tuesday. The book is called Runaway Devil, and we're going to get into the story behind this with our guest for the evening. And Sherri, again, please help me out. The last name is?
Zickefoose.
Zickefoose, okay, just as it looks. Sherri Zickefoose is a staff writer for the Calgary Herald, covered this, and is the co-author of the national best-selling true book about this crime, Runaway Devil, How Forbidden Love Drove a 12-year-old Girl to Murder Her Family. This is one of the weirder stories I've ever heard. Now, we've met our two main characters, and JR, the young girl, 12 years old at the time, 12 and a half, meets up with 23-year-old Jeremy Steinke at the mall. They become fast friends because of the kind of culture that they're both drawn to. At what point does he admit to her that he believes he's a 300-year-old werewolf?
It's something that we uncovered after the crime when we were in town. We basically set up camp there, and it was actually Bob that stumbled onto that one. He was interviewing a friend of Jeremy Steinke's, and this friend had actually been approached by Steinke, who wanted to enlist him into helping him with the murders. And it was the way these kids talked. It was no big deal. They like to talk about murder. They like to watch really violent movies. It's just sort of what their culture was. But things started to take a bit of a turn when Jeremy would not stop asking his friend to help kill this family. And finally, the friend it was freaking him out. It was scaring him. And he just didn't want to do it. So when Bob caught up with this guy, that's when we learned that Jeremy had been friends with a bunch of guys who used to go out into the woods in Medicine Hat when there was a full moon or any old time. And they really did say, and I think they did believe that they had a bit of werewolf in them.
Wow. And he crafts this image for himself. He's kind of in this goth culture. Now, the pictures, again, it's always hard to tell. Bruce Willis, Schwarzenegger, you know, Stallone look like big guys until you see them in person and they walk past you, and at 6'1", they're not such big guys when they pass me, and they're maybe at 5'10", 5'11". You're expecting bigger. The pictures of this guy, he looks like he's a bigger, bulkier guy. Is that the case, or is this just pictures making a 5'6" guy look a lot bigger than he really was?
Dave, I think it's the larger-than-life persona. I think it really does look like he's this big, menacing Hulk, but in life, when we saw him in court, you know, he was maybe 5'7", 5'8" tops. He's working out a lot in jail, so he's maintaining his physique, but he is by no means a great big crusher.
Now, had there been any tells in either of their lives that murder was so easily accessible to either one of them?
Well, I'm really glad you asked that, because that's what makes this case so unbelievable, is that they were leading such parallel lives with really not a hint of anything this diabolical, this heartless at all. I'll describe them both. I mean, Jeremy Steinke was raised in kind of a poor upbringing. His folks divorced when he was still quite young, and his mom had mentioned that there were a lot of alcohol problems, and it was a very unstable upbringing. And they lived in a trailer, and I don't think it was the happiest time all the time. He was picked on in school. His last name is Steinke, and of course kids are quite cruel, and they would change that to Stinky. He had a lot of problems doing well or succeeding in school, and he was made fun of for that as well. So he basically was leading this life that was not, he just wasn't going anywhere. And then you have JR, who was brought up in this middle-class home. Her parents both came from a life of addiction, but they had actually met in rehab. So they had turned their lives around and were succeeding on every front. JR's father was getting promotions. He worked in the oil patch out in the field, and he was doing well, and they bought their first house. That was their first family house that they owned was in Medicine Hat. And what a happy family picture they made.
So again, there's no flash of insanity. There's no killing puppies or lighting cats on fire in either one of these past. It's just a strange current of passion, strange lifestyle, and then it just comes apart at the seams. How long were these two together before the murder takes place?
Well, this is where it gets interesting. They were really only together for a couple of months, and she was a child living under her parents' roof. So you can imagine they weren't spending an inordinate amount of time together physically,
right,
but they were definitely meeting online, and they were chatting a lot, and they were making a lot of plans. So this is where the story takes a turn, where they were able to evolve their relationship online, and we were able to get copies of the conversations they were having, and they were absolutely chilling. They were really living a fantasy life.
Now, when you say that, when you say that, what, walk me through a little bit of that. What was it like? I mean, were they talking like they were Bella and Edward and, werewolves and vampires, or were they, how was this thing developing?
That's exactly what was happening. I think that JR saw herself as an older spirit, and she was very interested in Wicca. And she basically denounced everything she was raised with. Her father was raised French Catholic. Her mother was kind of a spiritual person because of her recovery and her rehab. But JR bucked against that, and she was very much interested in the dark side and had a pentagram on her wall in her room that we saw photos of. And she was basically just trying to reinvent herself, so she looked nothing like her family or where she came from. So online, she was posing on her multiple social media sites, developing all kinds of personalities, and that really appealed to Jeremy. He loved that. He, of course, telling everyone he was a werewolf, and that, he just believed in the dark side, and the two of them sort of met there, and that's where they fueled their relationship. They had profiles on vampirefreaks.com, and they just really reveled in that whole culture. They felt very free and not judged there.
I'm the father of 7 children, Sherri, and I can't even begin to imagine as this is starting to take place. I mean, are the parents aware of this pentagram in her room and her dark penchant for these? And I understand I'm the host of a paranormal show. I love learning about the dark side and learning what goes into why people are so intrigued by it. But as a father, I'm also, if my daughter started drawing pentagrams on the wall, we need to have a family discussion.
Well, absolutely. I mean, that's how normal people parent, and JR's parents are no different. They definitely did everything they could to rein her back in, because they didn't like what they were seeing. They knew that something was up, but unfortunately, they were always a couple of steps behind. And I think that's the lesson, or that's what we can take from this story is what's really going on. Teenage girls are notoriously private, and unfortunately, in JR's case, notoriously sneaky. And she was able to sneak out of her house, arrange meetings, have Jeremy pick her up at school. She was living a very private and different life nobody else knew about.
Did her parents have an inkling that she was dating a 23-year-old or involving herself with a man that old?
Well, not at first, because she was very secretive and was, sneaking off, saying she was with friends when she would go meet Jeremy at the mall. It was the perfect hiding spot, and of course he had a car, so they had a bit of freedom that way. But I'll tell you, from what we learned sitting through the trial, whenever he would phone the house, they could tell a man was phoning the house, and it wasn't a schoolmate, because they knew who her school friends were. They didn't like it one bit, and so they did what parents do and tried to get to the bottom of it and gave JR very typical punishments of being grounded because they knew she wasn't telling the truth. And they did take her computer privileges away, but unfortunately she outsmarted them. And she was able to sneak off to the public library or go to a friend's house or, arrange somehow, borrow somebody's phone to text, to arrange some sort of a meeting. And it's just remarkable that she was able to stay so far ahead.
We're going to take another break. When we come back, we'll talk with our guest and find out about when this love affair turned murderous. And this is absolutely a chilling case. Again, as a parent, I can't even begin to wrap my head around what's going on in the life of this girl to turn her into what she is about to become. Now, Sherri, we've set the stage. We've brought these two together. We've found out why they're together and what this attraction is. At what point does it go from a rebellious teen sneaking out windows to, you know what? Let's kill my parents. Was this her idea or was it his idea?
Well, I think your listeners will be shocked to know that through the court process, we learned it was entirely her idea. And how a 12-year-old has that sort of power over a 23-year-old man is a wonder. But,
well, now let me ask you something, though, about that. Okay, just playing, pardon the pun, devil's advocate here. Okay? Could it be that they knew, if she takes the heat for this, she can get off eventually, and if it's his idea and he twisted this little girl, his jail time, his life is going to be even worse. Could there be any angle that was what was going on instead of it actually being her idea, that it could have been more Jeremy? Is that right?
Well, I think that is, we see that kind of case, especially in the States. I'm sure your listeners are familiar with cases where people will cook up a plan and they'll bring in a minor because it's going to make it a lot easier to skate right through. In fact, I don't think in this case that was what was at play, because I don't think they were sophisticated enough. They had a plan. It just wasn't necessarily a good plan. And I think what's happened is that JR was getting sick of answering to her parents. She was getting sick of being grounded and being told what to do, and there were all these rules, and she did not like it. So she wanted her freedom, and her solution, her method of getting freedom was to kill her parents. She decided also to include her brother in that mix, and why, no one will ever really know.
Just running away, that wasn't good enough for her. She just decided that, we just have to end this thing once and for all and kill everyone.
Well, she had tried to run away at least once before that we had heard of. And, of course, her parents just found her, and she knew they would go to the ends of the earth to find her. She knew they loved her. And this was, in her mind, her only way out. She basically saw her parents as an obstacle to her freedom, to her boyfriend, to just running the show herself. And so she told everyone who would listen that she hated her parents. She wishes they were dead. She wanted them to just go away. And I guess, unfortunately, she told the wrong person that. And that was Jeremy Steinke.
So she begins to craft this idea of let's kill my parents. And as the court proceedings roll out and you find out more about this story, does Jeremy seem to just go along with this willingly, or is he trying to talk her out of it at any point?
going along with it because this is how he and his friends talked, right? They're very angry. They're disenfranchised. They kind of live fantasy lives because they don't have great lives themselves. And so this kind of talk is very normal for them. It's what they do. They just concoct sort of alter egos and fantasies, and everyone's a werewolf or, a vampire. And they really did believe in what they were saying. And I think that Jeremy went along with it because he was familiar and comfortable in that world of talk. But the difference is that JR was very serious, and she started pressuring him. And he told friends, she's going to break up with me if I don't do this. And we also know that they had been engaging in sexual activity, so you can imagine she was probably using her female power to get him to do what she wanted.
Wow. I can honestly say I've never had that good of sex in my life that I'd think, I'll kill him for you. Never that good, Sherri. I don't know. I feel a little cheated now. I'm sorry, I don't mean to make light. This is a horrible story and a horrible situation. It just, to me, it is so astounding that just to keep getting laid, somebody would go along with this case. And I guess, you kind of find yourself in this culture where you think you're a big badass werewolf, and again, I'm probably going to get hate email from the werewolf culture, but it is what it is. This just seems like such a bizarre. It's such a weird, tumultuous deal. And how do you put these two perfect storms together to create what is about to happen is just, what are the odds? And unfortunately, they're pretty good, I guess, because this isn't something new. The story's old, right? Bonnie and Clyde and Charles Starkweather. And there's been multiple people that just come together that shouldn't have these kind of explosive backgrounds. And then they get together and ignite into something nuclear.
Well, we see team killers very often in history. You're absolutely right when you talk about Bonnie and Clyde or the Starkweather case. I think what we have here is a case of fire and gasoline. I don't think that JR would have been able to kill her parents on her own. She needed to enlist somebody to do the dirty work. And I don't think Jeremy would have just killed the family for the sake of it, because that wasn't really in his background. He had very minor crimes and really didn't exhibit any kind of behavior that would show he would do that. But you've got this young girl who's got him wrapped around her finger, and he sees in her everything he doesn't have. He sees stability. He sees love. He sees his future. Now she... And
did you just hear what you said? He sees stability. Unbelievable that to this guy, this is, you know what? She's a keeper. If she's willing to wipe out her family just to stay with me, Tim, this is the woman I'm marrying.
Stability in a 12-year-old.
Now, this is what we're talking about.
Unbelievable.
We're talking about fantasy, right? This is fantasy. He sees her, and they have a plan where they want to go to Germany and buy a castle, and their friends will live with them, and they'll raise children. It's all fantasy. They are not living in reality. So you can see that this is where they're coming from. They think this is a plan. This is a good idea. It's a horrible idea, but nobody else would have done it. That's why you have these two together. That's why it happened.
Oh, chilling. Runaway Devil is the book. You can find it on Amazon.com. I suggest you pick up this book and read it. Tonight, we're going to gloss over. We're getting to a lot of the points, but this story is so deep, and I feel that even in the next hour and 15 minutes, we're going to do nothing but just hit the tip of the iceberg. We have to take a break. Our guest, Sherri Zickefoose, is going to stay with us. We'll be back. We'll talk more about this case and get to the murders right after this. Now, did we get that right? She is JR, the main antagonist in this real story. 12 years old. She is the youngest killer in Canadian history to go up for multiple murders. Is that right?
Absolutely. We've never, ever had a case where we had somebody that young who was convicted of 3 first-degree counts of homicide.
This is the tough part. Walk us through when the murders went down and how it happened.
Well, JR had been texting, emailing, talking with Jeremy, and she was really ratcheting up the pressure. She really told everyone anyone within earshot knew that JR was saying, I hate my parents, I want them to die. So she actually went as far as to email Jeremy, and there is an email on record that says, so I have this plan. It involves us killing them. Or something like that. I can't quite...
right, you're paraphrasing. Yeah.
But basically, she lays it out for all people to see. Well, I guess it was to Jeremy, but regardless, she laid it out. And he agreed that it was a great idea. So he was panicking a little bit, trying to enlist a friend to help him, because he was really serious. He was going to have to do this. He believed her threats that, she wasn't going to be very happy if he didn't do this. So he spent an evening, the night...
Well, yeah, and you got to take that a little serious, don't you, Sherri? If your girlfriend's wackadoo enough to want to kill her family, you probably don't want to piss this girl off.
Well, I think this is where your listeners will be pretty interested because, we hear this talk. If people that are interested in this stuff, you're online, you're reading about it, you're hearing about it, people talk this way. Does everybody mean it? I don't know. I don't think they do. I think there's just some people that it's an outlet for them. It's a way to express themselves. They're interested in the culture and the fantasy of it. But in this case, things are very serious. And he knew that she wasn't just kidding. He was panicking. He confided in people. She's going to break up with me if I don't do this. And so he spent the night watching his very favorite movie, Natural Born Killers.
Oh, yeah, that's a feel-good film.
He described it as a love story. And he drank an awful lot of alcohol. He got his hands on some cocaine, and he was jacked up. And he basically went into her suburban home at I think it's about 5 o'clock in the morning. He crashes through a basement window. JR's mother comes flying down the stairs, hearing this commotion, thinking her daughter is going to sneak out again, and she's going to catch her in the act. And unfortunately, she comes face to face with Jeremy Steinke, dressed all in black. He's got a black ski mask on. He would have been an absolutely horrifying sight, and he's holding a very big knife. Mm. So Jeremy, unfortunately, was able to stab JR's mom to death multiple times. She was stabbed. It was just a frenzy, and you can imagine the kind of commotion that would have caused. So JR's father hears this. He comes thundering down the stairs. He's a big man. He's fit. He's thick. And even though it's 5 in the morning and he's just been startled awake, he's ready for a fight. And it was an absolute death battle. From the photos we saw of the crime scene, every surface was covered in blood. There was furniture broken, a spindle railing smashed. This was a fight that went on for quite some time. And JR's father put up a heroic effort to try to overcome Jeremy, but unfortunately, Jeremy's the one with the knife, so guess who wins? Mm. And this is one of the hardest parts of this story, is that the testimony that we heard as JR's father is bleeding to death and falling on Jeremy Steinke, knocking them both to the ground. He says, why are you doing this? And Jeremy Steinke says, he told JR's father, because your daughter wanted it. So I think this...
What a horrifying thought. I mean, you already realize that you're dying. You can't protect... You think that your daughter and son are now in danger, and you're not able to do anything to protect them. And then the last words you're going to hear is that this was your daughter's doing. I can't even begin to wrap my head around that.
It's terrifying. It's a terrible detail of the reality, and for these kids that were really believed in the dark side and that, they were otherworldly, this is a horrible jolt to reality. I mean, the knife that Jeremy used to stab JR's parents was hooked. He used it with such force. It actually bent. It was just a horrifying thing to see, but it gets much worse.
Now, unfortunately, they turn their attention on her little brother. there was no thought of just leaving him be and taking off and leaving it, or did the little brother know who this killer was and why he was there?
Well, JR and Jeremy talked about this very topic, and it was apparently JR's idea that her little brother was so sensitive, afraid of the dark. You know, he was a very sensitive, likable little boy, very typical little boy who loved baseball. It was her belief that he was just too sensitive and had nightmares that they couldn't leave him without parents. So it was better just to take him with them.
To take him with the two of them?
Yeah, well, to murder them.
Okay, so they decide they're going to murder, and at this time, JR's brother is how old?
He's 8 years old. He likes Star Wars. You know, he likes pets, he likes baseball, he loves hockey. Such a typical little guy. His bedroom is upstairs. All the family bedrooms were upstairs. The murders happened down in the basement. It was a 4-level, split-level home. So this is where the story gets interesting and very telling about how JR is thinking. Neither one of these two, JR or Jeremy, have admitted killing the little boy. They blame each other. They have put the blame on each other from day one. And I think that's a very interesting detail. So we're not getting a very clear picture on exactly what happened, but I've seen those crime scene photos, and it was horrific. That little boy would have been absolutely terrified.
Now, there is a quote online. There's a part that's circulating, and it says, her little brother pleaded for his life. I'm scared. I'm too young to die. Before his sister stabbed him in the chest and her boyfriend cut his throat. Is this something that just some internet hoaxers put up, or is this real information that came out during the trial?
Oh, that came out during the trial. That, I believe, was from JR's interview with the police. And again, I mean, boy, it's a pretty heartless thing to be able to hear your little brother say that and to continue with the killing. I would really hate to think that actually happened, because if it did, it shows that.
Do you think she was just trying to build her own fantasy? She was trying to make herself sound like a bigger hard ass by admitting to something like that?
I mean, that could certainly be the case. I don't know that we'll ever really know, and that's another fascinating point to all this that we can get into later in our conversation. But, I mean, that little boy tried to fight them off. There was blood found all over his light. He had a toy lightsaber, Star Wars toy, covered in blood. And we can only imagine that he was trying to fend them off. But he was found in his bed with his throat slit, wide open, and there were some very shallow stabbing wounds to his chest. Those were certainly not any kind of indicator that that's what he died from.
Not the killing blows.
Right. And of course, JR's story is that Jeremy came running up the stairs covered in blood and, tried to get her to kill her brother. I did this for you. You have to do this for me. And she said she couldn't. It was just too hard. She made some tentative, tiny little stabs. And she said she just couldn't, so he finished the job. And it doesn't really stack up. It's not a very believable story.
Runaway Devil, how forbidden love drove a 12-year-old girl to murder her family. Check out the website runawaydevil.com. Again, that's runawaydevil.com. When we come back, we'll continue learning more about this case and about the aftermath. Our guest this evening is author and Calgary Herald journalist Sherri Zickefoose. Stay tuned. More Darkness Radio and more True Crime Tuesday continues right after this. We hope you're enjoying our final episode of True Crime Tuesday Revisited for our special Halloween edition. Remember, the scariest stories are true.
Beyond the darkness.
Good evening and welcome. This is the best in paranormal talk radio, Darkness Radio is on the air. I'm your host, Dave Schrader. Along with me, Tim Dennis. Tonight, True Crime Tuesday. Our guest this evening is Sherri Zickefoose, and she is a staff writer for the Calgary Herald and the co-author of the national best-selling true crime book, Runaway Devil, How Forbidden Love Drove a 12-year-old Girl to Murder Her Family, written with her colleague, Robert Remington. Sherri has interviewed and written about many other devils in her career, from child killers to unrepentant rapists and murderers, throw in a few diabolical burglars and fugitives, and, well, there you have it. She writes about villains and victims, remorse and reform, and unlikely heroes. As she says, it's a living. Runaway Devil is a regular topic for Sherri's guest lectures at Mount Royal University, University of Calgary, Bow Valley College, as well as area service clubs and writers groups. The book is out and available, and you can find information about it at runawaydevil.com. Again, it's runawaydevil.com. This is the very true, very shocking story of JR, a 12-year-old Canadian girl who is convicted of participating in the murders of her mother, father, and 8-year-old brother in the spring of 2006. Her accomplice and her boyfriend at the time, 23-year-old Jeremy Allen Steinke, who professed to be a 300-year-old werewolf with a taste for blood. Together, the pair concocted a plot to murder JR's family so they could pursue an illicit relationship forbidden by her parents. A terrifying story, and we've walked you through the meeting of these two, the unfortunate end result of them coming together in the brutal murder of her family. Sherri Zickefoose, our guest this evening and co-author of the book, Runaway Devil. Sherri, when this case happened and this went on, you said that the original news broke and that they were looking for the missing girl who they assumed had maybe been abducted from the crime scene at the time. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
So at that point, they had splashed JR's real name and photographs all over. Mm-hmm. And where did the worm turn? How did they realize that this seemingly sweet, beautiful 12-year-old girl may actually be the culprit and involved in the murder of her family?
Well, I'll take us back to the death house where there were bodies in the basement. Her parents, of course, stabbed by Jeremy Steinke, and then upstairs, her 8-year-old brother killed in his bedroom. We'll fast forward to the next day, and sometime in the late morning, early afternoon, next door neighbor boy wants to come and play with his little friend, and he can see the parents' truck in the driveway, so he knows somebody's home. He's phoning and phoning, no one is answering, so the little tyke runs to the door, and nobody answers the door. He goes over to the window and looks inside to see if he can see his friend. And unfortunately for that little boy, all he saw were bodies covered in blood.
Oh.
So it's just, this crime's affected so many people. This poor little guy runs home to his mother, telling her what he's seen. And, of course, she's upset and thinking he's telling stories, so he drags her over, and she takes a look, screams, throws her family in the car, drives off to phone 911. She's so terrified that there's a killer lurking nearby. That's how violent this scene was. And so what we have is the police coming to surround this home. Maybe this is early afternoon by the time they get there, and they ram the door in. Police run around all of the different levels of the home trying to figure out what the heck they're dealing with. And as they're coming out of the house to sort of compare notes in the front, one of them catches a glimpse of a family portrait, a framed family photo that's sitting on a bureau. And sure enough, there's 4 people. So there's a missing girl. They've got 3 people accounted for dead. One of them is missing. This is when they start to panic. This is when they start to think someone's been abducted. So immediately following protocol, and by no fault of their actions at the time, they had all the goodness in their heart. They have to find this girl. It's the weekend. They have no idea if this little girl's away at a swim meet, if she's slept over at a girlfriend's house. They have no idea how they're going to find this kid. So they enlist the help of a school counselor who takes them into the school, opens up her locker for them, and they start looking for phone numbers so they can start phoning members of the swim team or girlfriends they know that she hangs out with. And funny enough, what they find changes absolutely everything. They find a stick drawing, a cartoon, a doodle, like any other kid would draw. But this drawing is a lot different. This is a drawing of somebody, JR, lighting her family on fire and laughing as they're dying and screaming. So in an instant, the police take one look at this thing, and they figure out suddenly they've got a suspect on their hands.
Our guest this evening, Sherri Zickefoose, and she is the co-author of the book Runaway Devil. After the murders, did they involve themselves in their fantasy world anymore? Was there drinking of blood or any other strangeness that surrounds this part of the story, especially with as deep as they went into this fantasy that they had created?
Well, I think that's a really good question. We had some questions. The house was just covered in blood. There were big blood smears all over the bodies and up and down the stairs. But during the trial, it came out that they just assumed that was Jeremy running up the stairs and, just the normal cast-off or, putting his arms out to sort of keep him from falling over. So we're not really sure what they did in that house after the killings. But I think something that's very disturbing, and your listeners won't maybe think that this is, I don't know, maybe it's too hard to believe, but when we think of a 12-year-old who has just arranged for her entire family to be murdered, but the two of them end up leaving the home at separate times and reconvening and having sex. Just, mere hours after the killings, they spent the rest of the afternoon at a party at a friend's house drinking, giggling, and kissing. And JR told everybody it was her birthday, so they were giving her drinks. So they basically celebrated their freedom and their new lives.
Unbelievable. The evil of man.
Well,
and it can be as young as 12 years old. This girl snapped. I mean, and I don't want to trivialize the situation, folks. And, this doesn't go on the shoulders of Stephanie Meyer and her Twilight creations and things like that. I mean, this is something that, has happened through the centuries. People that want a break from their reality and they grab and latch onto some kind of strange alternate world for themselves and think it's okay. And I don't blame Hollywood. I don't blame video games on this type of thing. It's just people are broken, man, and they do stupid things. And, it just takes the right nudge to get them in that direction.
I don't think anybody expected that these two would take this fantasy this far, right? Because I think people grow out of this kind of lifestyle. I think they outgrow it or they find new things, maybe in the same genre, but they find new things that occupy their imagination or fuel them, fuel their passions. But this just took it to a whole new level. They thought they were untouchable. The very fact that they could be at a party not far from where the bodies were still laying on the ground. They're at a party and they're drinking and they're giggling and they're still concocting fantasy stories and making a plan to drive away together. It just shows they were not in any way accepting that this was real.
The crime is so horrific. The aftermath even worse. Did they go back? Did they have sex in this home with blood? Did they go to this party and just party it out and have fun? They then go on the run. How long are they actually out on the run?
Well, they didn't make it very far. I think once JR's photo appeared on the evening news, the pennies started to drop. These kids maybe sobered up a little bit from their afternoon of drinking and drug smoking, and one by one, they started to trickle into the police station and said, what they had seen and what they had heard. And thankfully, they did the right thing. They didn't understand it. They were pretty upset but they had finally kind of put two and two together, and the police were able to predict that they would be driving a certain way out of town. We're talking, again, sort of a typical Midwestern-style small city. There was really one road out and one road in, so they knew where to look, and sure enough, they found them. They had a couple of friends in a getaway pickup truck. They'd convinced the friends to drive them out of town. They really didn't have a game plan. Remember, I'd said earlier, they thought they would maybe go to Germany and buy a castle. They were just reaching for the fantasy. They didn't make it far. They made it to the next province over, and they were caught and sent right back to Medicine Hat.
When she's brought in and the police bring her in to talk to her about this, at this point, are they considering that she's really the mastermind at this, or do they think that this 23-year-old has somehow Svengulied her and she is under his spell?
The police were really worried once they had figured out who these kids were and learned how they talked and how they thought. They actually thought they were going to maybe have some ring where more parents were going to be found dead. They didn't know what was happening. So you can imagine the level of terror once they learned about certain websites. And, you know, I don't mean to dump on vampirefreaks.com, but at the time, for a smaller city, they were quite worried that they had some big conspiracy ring or that there was some horrible, wide-reaching plot. But when they brought them back, I think because JR was just 12 years old and probably looking very fearful at this point after getting caught, I think they did think that maybe she was goaded into it or forced into it. But, you know, I was able to see a copy of her police interview, and it becomes very apparent very soon that she is not the innocent lamb who was led astray. She lied, I think, 3 or 4 times about what had actually happened, and I think it became very clear that she was trying to cover her own tracks. She wasn't trying to protect her boyfriend. She was trying to protect herself.
How does he respond now that he's in custody? Does he start to collapse and fold, realizing what he's done? Or does he still think that somehow he's going to transform at the next full moon and break them both out and they'll be free and that this is all just a bad dream?
Well, here's the difference between them and how they think differently. Jeremy Steinke was very upset. He seemed to me very remorseful. He was crying. He confessed. He immediately said what had happened. He wasn't trying to hide anything. He was being cooperative. He was bashing his own head against the table and the wall. He was very upset. The difference is he's the one that told the police everything that happened. The girl, not so much. She was still really trying to cover her tracks and not tell the truth, and that difference means everything. I think that tells us a lot about who was in charge.
And she's trying to sell him down the river, or she's trying to sell him out that it was all his idea at this point still?
Well, they were definitely blaming each other for the death of the little boy. So I think what was the most interesting and the most telling piece of evidence that we have in our book is the jailhouse love letters. This was an idea that's probably very commonly done in the States, I'm not sure, but the lead detective knew this was a young couple and decided that he would let them exchange letters back and forth because they missed each other. And so, of course, every time they would write a letter to one another, he would make a copy of it. And sure enough, it really spelled out some very horrifying attitudes. They were making plans to be together, comforting one another. It wasn't the kind of talk like, oops, we've messed up, what have we done? I'm so sorry this has happened. It's, we'll get past this, we'll be together. And Jeremy actually proposed marriage to JR, and she accepted.
The depths to which some people are broken amaze me. I'm often asked, doing the show and being a paranormal investigator and going around the world, have I ever been frightened? And got to say that, it's an overused statement, but the dead don't frighten me. It's the living and what they're capable of. And to the ends of violence that they will go for any strange purpose. To think that he was going to live a happily ever after life with a 12-year-old girl and that they could get away with multiple murder. Unbelievable.
Well, it's interesting, and I'll say one thing right here because I know your listeners will be thinking it, and I get asked this question a lot: is why wasn't Jeremy Steinke charged with statutory rape,
right,
as well as 3 counts of first-degree murder, which they were both charged and convicted of? And it turns out that the police felt they already had them on the most serious criminal charge you could possibly get, and it would cost taxpayers a lot of money, the court system a lot of time, to go for another charge of, we call it up here in Canada, sexual interference. And it wouldn't net him that much extra time anyway. And I think the people among us that are, justice junkies, that want people to atone for every sin, they want that charge, they want that conviction. But in the real world, they already had him for something pretty big, so they were willing to let that slide.
Understandable. I mean, you've got him on the major crime here. Now, did she go on record? I know that they didn't want to take the blame for the child's murder, but did she go on record for having masterminded this? Was she kind of proud of what had occurred and that she was the one in charge, or was she still kind of putting it off on him?
Her entire defense, because remember, I don't think I mentioned this at the top, they had separate trials. And I'm not sure that would happen in the States. But here, because we have a young offender, she gets her own separate. She was tried as a youth. He was charged as an adult in a separate trial. So what was interesting is that she was being tried for a crime everyone just agreed he had committed. She was found guilty for her part in it, which was the planning. And that, I think, is what makes this really interesting, is that she didn't have to have a good plan, but her entire defense was that she was just kidding. Every time she said, I hate my parents, I wish they were dead, I want someone to kill them, she said, I was just venting. I was stressed, and that's just how I talk, and I didn't mean it. I didn't mean these things. I didn't think he'd take me seriously. That was a 12-year-old girl's defense. It's maybe what you would expect, but it just didn't hold water. The jury didn't believe it. It wasn't good enough, and they convicted her.
We're going to take our bottom of the hour break. When we return, I want to find out, Sherri, you mentioned at the top of the show that there are strange circumstances about this case, and the fact that had she been 6 months younger, she would have never even been tried for this case. And now when she gets out in 2.5 years, if she keeps her nose clean for 5 years, they will wipe this from her record. I want to know more and try to understand that, and also find out what happened to Team Werewolf in this case, and how long is he in, and will he ever see the light of day? We'll be back and find out more about this case. Check out runawaydevil.com. That's runawaydevil.com. We'll be back with more Darkness Radio right after this. When the story unraveled and all of these points became known to you, and you were able to go over the jailhouse love letters and the testimonies and the admissions, was there ever a point, Sherri, where you just thought, I don't know that I want to know more. I don't know that I want to continue covering this case. This is just dark.
I think that this case just grabbed us from the very get-go. I think Bob explains it the best when he says, as journalists, we don't really choose the stories. They choose us. We were assigned to go. When the bodies were still in the house when I arrived in Medicine Hat, and I didn't leave that town for 2 weeks. And we just kept making these unbelievable connections with people and learning more, and the whole Jeremy thinking he was a werewolf, and learning more about this culture and what these kids were, what their daily lives were like. I wanted to know more the whole way along, and I was really grateful to my bosses for letting me own the story, basically, and to cover both trials and to just live and breathe it for a few years. I really liked, because I wanted those answers myself. But I'll tell you, there was one point where I just about had enough, and it was that day that we read the love letters. The prison love letters really stick with me because they were written in their own handwriting, and there's little doodles in the margins, and you can tell that they just don't care that they've killed an entire family. They are so focused on being together with this crazy idea of running off to Germany and buying a castle and getting married, and they are just not thinking about what they've actually done. They don't care. They don't feel bad about it. And that's when it kind of hit me, and it was just a little too close, I guess, seeing their own handwriting. It was just a little too much, and I remember that being a tough day. But, you know, you have a glass of wine and you have a sleep, and then you're right back at it the next day.
This case is strange in the fact that, if I understand this correctly, she was 12 and a half years old when this murder took place. If she would have been 11 and a half, would she have ever seen 1 minute in court? Not one. The laws in Canada, if you're under 12, then you're not criminally responsible. You just, you're too young, and I'm sure there's some other provisions, but it's certainly not going to go to the courts. And that's something that I think people were upset about. This trial was really more about just JR. This really put the Youth Criminal Justice Act on trial as well. And I'm still enjoying reading about this national dialogue, and now international, thanks to you guys, what we think about young people and how we treat them. How do we punish them? Do we rehabilitate them? What do we do to undo the mess that they've made? And it's a discussion that keeps going on because people are very divided. Well, right. I mean, here's my thought. If somebody is this broken and twisted at 12 and then goes and does time from the age of 12 to 18 or, you know, into her 20s, as you said, and she's due to get out within the next 2.5 years, is that correct? Yes. That will be the end of her sentence. Okay. So there's some hardening and life-altering activity going on behind the scenes and behind bars now for this woman. If she keeps her nose clean for 5 years, it's all expunged from her record, and it's like it never happened. And how do you go about rehabilitating somebody who went straight from a murderous, heartless rampage straight into incarceration and then release them back into the world without fear that, I mean, I have a hard time wrapping my head around anybody that's murdered anybody ever getting out of jail. Unless it was, you know, in self-defense. I can't. I think I'd have to agree. I think we're really testing the public's confidence that this is going to work. In Canada, this girl received what we call an IRCS sentence. It's an intensive rehabilitative custodial sentence. That means you're getting intensive psychotherapy. It's pricey. It's $100,000 a year. So she was getting the best of the best intensive psychotherapy to deal with this. And it's a graduated program where you become, they try to reintegrate you into the community. Because remember, this child has been in custody since she was 12. She barely knew how to use the bank machine, which is not to say she's dumb. That's certainly not the case, but she's just been out of circulation. So it's really to her credit, or society's credit, that we have her functioning and to get her to work with us. Because I don't know that I'm comfortable with the idea of throwing children away. I don't think that does anybody any good. And the people who really want justice, who want her to do hard time, that's not going to do any good. That's going to harden her and teach her things we probably don't want her to know. So this has been a very interesting test of, do we trust our government to do the right thing, to make sure she's got the best care? Is it really working? We'll never know. We'll never know her records. We'll never know how she did. Well, you know, unfortunately, as you mentioned, it's leaked. The story's on the internet. There are pictures and postings and names. Just she's never going to really fully escape the crime. And you know, somebody will try to look into it in 5, 10, 15 years when she's out, and I'm sure it'll resurface, hopefully, she's still keeping her nose clean and not involving herself in anything that puts her back into the headlines ever. It's hard. It's a different point. And that's what we're going to talk about in hour 3. We've got another case we're going to talk about, and we're going to open up phone lines. Should children be tried as adults when they commit heinous crimes like this, especially ones that are thought out, that are plotted and planned? And we'll talk about that in hour 3 of tonight's show, and we'll welcome your calls, 651-989-5855, 651-989-5855. We'll do that in hour 3. I guess, I had a personal tragedy befall me, and a friend of mine, very close friend, a number of years ago, back in 1995. And an unbelievable murder, triple homicide again. And it's very hard as a survivor, and I say that in not knowing what other term to use, but somebody that's left behind and has to feel the loss and be a part of this, and then watch these criminals get unbelievable privileges. And like you said, true crime buffs, we want there to be ultimate penalty. We want there to be justice. And is there justice served in this case? Is JR worthy of seeing the light of day when 3 people that were murdered will never know what it's like to take another breath? An 8-year-old boy will never know what it's like to have had his first kiss and have gone on the internet and have snuck out the window and had his rights revoked by this person. How, you deal with this kind of crime all the time in your work. How do you put that into perspective for somebody like myself who just can't, I don't know how to get around that point that I don't know that there should ever be freedom for somebody like that?
Well, I think that's a really common feeling. There is this need for justice. It's a conversation I'm monitoring online and in forums and watching how people are talking about this. And I think there really is this pound of flesh that the public really wants. They just don't want her to get off easy. But I think we have to realize this is a very, very sick person. We will never know the full extent of her illness on the record. But as a child, she was diagnosed with oppositional defiant disorder and conduct disorder. Those are 2 very serious personality disorders that down the road can be used to diagnose somebody who is a sociopath or a psychopath. So I think this is a very serious illness, and she's right where she needs to be.
JR, a 12-year-old Canadian girl convicted in participating in the murders of her mother, father, and 8-year-old brother in the spring of 2006, along with her accomplice and boyfriend, a 23-year-old named Jeremy Allen Steinke, who was a self-professed 300-year-old werewolf with a taste for blood. Together, these 2 got together and committed one of the most heinous crimes. And this 12-year-old girl is the youngest on record in Canada to be incarcerated for multiple murders. Have there been others that have done it, but because they were under the age of 12, it just never gets to surface? Is that kind of the way that may actually play out, Sherri?
Well, thankfully, that's not, we don't have a lot of those. I don't want to misrepresent Canada. There's the odd case of a child, and I wish I could give you the statistic right off the top of my head. Very few and far between that it's ever happened. But it's not something that we see. And, of course, having a 12-year-old being described as the architect of 3 homicides is unheard of.
Now, the boyfriend we talked about, he went, and what is his sentence? What was her sentence total? What was all involved in hers when she was found? Was she found guilty? What was she found guilty of? And what was her sentence? And what about him?
JR had a jury trial, and she was given the maximum. And she was convicted on 3 counts of first-degree murder because she was determined to be the architect. She was basically the one that made the plan, and that was good enough. You don't have to be the one who's doing the killing. You just have to be a part to be planning for that killing. So that's sort of where she falls in.
Well, then doesn't that, all the people that were involved in their little twisted Twilight circle and knew about this and knew that they were planning this, and he was bragging that and admitting to these people that he had to kill their family because of this, and the people that came forward, shouldn't they be held accountable? They knew this was going on. They knew that he was talking this up and that it was becoming very real. Why was nobody else held accountable for that?
Well, honestly, I think it was the court's decision that they weren't really culpable. They just were a bunch of misguided, disenfranchised kids who just didn't take them seriously. It's the fact that he and JR were planning and pushing this plan further and getting into the details. That's what made it stick. The other ones, they all testified, so in some ways it changed their lives. They had to get up there and explain what they heard, what they all talked about, and what really happened. And I sure hope it's changed them, but what I'm learning is that may not be the case.
Well, for our listeners out there, if you hear something, if you see something, if you know something, then say something. If people are talking about it, whether you think they're just being goofy and off the cuff or they're just venting, tell somebody before it's too late. I'd much rather, I can guarantee you, I would much rather find out that my daughter was just having a bad day than wake up with a butcher knife in my chest. I mean, I'd rather be able to have that addressed before the murder occurs, as I think most people would. So for any listeners out there, if you hear anything strange at school, at work, at home, and you feel it's worthy of sharing, then please get the word out. That's my opinion on it. I don't know where you stand on that, and I know we can start up a whole nation of willy-nillys and everybody jumping at shadows, but sometimes I think maybe jumping at shadows needs to happen, especially in today's culture with kids on the rise. I mean, there's a lot of anger, a lot of violence that takes place in the United States, and it comes from children now. Unbelievable.
Well, unfortunately, it seems to be the way and what's happening. And JR was speaking of these horrible wishes and things, and her teachers, she had a guidance teacher that had called her mother in to talk about things, but I don't think anybody really thought they were going to go the distance. So here we have JR now with the maximum sentence of 10 years. She got credit for the time she spent in custody awaiting her trial. We've got Jeremy, who got an adult sentence for the exact same conviction of 3 counts of first-degree murder. He got a life sentence with no hope of parole for 25 years. So very, very different punishments for the exact same crime.
Do these two keep in touch now?
My intelligence tells me that is not the case. The big love affair fizzled once they were putting the blame on each other for the little boy's death. That was the end of that.
It's a chilling story. It's a remarkable case, and so many weird twists and turns. Have there been, and we're not trying to put a black eye on Canada in any way, shape, or form. I hope you understand by asking these type of things. I mean, I'm ashamed at times of America and to the levels of violence and to the depths and ages that involve themselves in it. But do they have crimes, satanic ritual crimes, violent crimes, these weird, bizarre cult-like crimes that take place on occasion out there? Or do you guys seem pretty relieved of that? Is it, I just never hear those stories coming out of Canada.
Dave, those things happen everywhere. They may be few and far between just because Canada has a lower population than the United States, but we can't kid ourselves. It happens everywhere. We just, I think, don't see the frequency. It's not on the radar all the time. But, there's all kinds of reasons that people commit these murders and make these plans. And unfortunately, there's a lot of disturbed people out there that escape into these alter egos and these parallel realities, and they do these horrible things. And unfortunately, that's always going to be the way. I don't think we're ever going to be free of that.
Did you ever have a one-on-one conversation with JR?
JR is a ward of the province, so she is under the government's control. So that was never something we were able to secure. And part of me is okay with that, because I think if I interviewed her, I think she would probably just lie anyway. I don't know that I'd get the truth, so I'm not sure that's worth my time.
But now she's an adult. I mean, is there any thought of doing a follow-up and finding out where her mentality is? I mean, is she still considered a ward of the state or the country or province?
Yep, for now. We've got 2.5 years left for that, and I've obviously made it known, because this has been I'm very involved in this, so it's nothing I'm going to let go. So her lawyers definitely know we're interested to taking this further. But here's where they are. Because she's protected by privacy laws, no one can ever publish her face or her name. So they feel she doesn't really have to, unless she wants to. She doesn't really have to give the big sit-down interview like we normally see with some people who are maybe trying to clear their names or make a new start or express any kind of remorse. I don't think we're going to see that out of JR. She's very, very bright. She doesn't fit the mold of the typical person that gets into this kind of trouble. She landed on her feet, I think. I don't know that she will need to come forward to say anything. She's changed her name legally. She's doing schooling right now in university, so I'm not really sure she's going to need to come forward to say anything. So we based our book on the testimony we saw for ourselves right before our eyes with her in the courtroom, with the texts and the love letters and everything we could get that way. And she basically speaks for herself.
Sherri Zickefoose, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show this evening. Runaway Devil, How Forbidden Love Drove a 12-year-old Girl to Murder Her Family. You can find that book and check out the information at runawaydevil.com. Again, that's runawaydevil.com. Thank you very much for joining us this month with our special editions of True Crime Tuesday Revisited. We hope you've enjoyed them as much as we've enjoyed bringing them to you.